Hi guys, I'm Ashley. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to show you 4 different ways to do raglan increases. And what do I mean by raglan increases? So these are different ways. If you're knitting a top-down raglan sweater, like my fall bluff sweater, you will be completing the sweater by knitting 8 different increases along 4 sections of your sweater to increase for the sleeves and the body. So you'll have 4 sections, the front and the back, or the sleeves, or if you're doing a cardigan, you'll have 2 front sections. But basically, you do raglan increases strategically placed across the sweater to expand enough for the body and the sleeves. So I'm just going to show you 4 different ways to make these raglan increases. For reference, this is my fall bluff sweater, a free pattern and tutorial available for you guys on my channel. I've linked that here, and it's also all the sweaters I've referenced in the video will be linked below for you guys. All right, so the very first raglan increase I'm going to show you is pretty simple and straightforward. If you are new to knitting top-down sweaters, if you're new to raglan sweaters, this is a great way to start. This is how I first started knitting a sweater, by knitting one in the front and the back. This is my simply stated cardigan, and here's what the raglan increase looks like between the front and the sleeve here. And this is usually abbreviated by K1, F, and B. Knit 1 in the front and in the back. So you are going to want to knit to the first stitch, knit to 1 stitch before the first stitch marker. So I'm going to knit all the way and leave this stitch. All right, and once I am there, I knit to 1 stitch before the stitch marker. I'm going to knit 1 in the front and knit 1 in the back. So I do a regular knit, but instead of pulling that off the needle, I turn the needle to the back and insert my needle there, yarn over and pull through. So I've increased a stitch, and then you slip that off. Then you're going to want to slip the stitch marker and do that knit 1 in the front and the back again. Knit 1 in the front, keep that stitch on there, turn and insert your needle into the back, yarn over, pull through, and pull everything off. So now we've just increased 2 stitches on either side of the stitch marker. So you'll repeat that. You'll knit to 1 stitch before the next stitch marker, knit 1 in the front and back, slip your marker, knit 1 in the front and back again. And then when you are knitting flat, if you're knitting a cardigan, on the wrong side of the work, you will just purl, but if you are knitting in the round, after you complete a raglan increase round by knitting 1 in the front and back on either side of the stitch marker, you'll just do a simple knit round without any increases. If you were to increase every single round, your sweater would become too wide too fast. Some patterns call for, if you're knitting in the round, some patterns might have you complete 2 knit rounds before you do a raglan increase. Just depends, just check your pattern. I will show you this one more time, but typically on raglan increase sweaters, you are increasing every other round. I've got an extra loop here. All right, so again, you knit to 1 stitch before the stitch marker. And once you get to that stitch that's right before the stitch marker, you knit 1 in the front and you knit 1 in the back. Slip the marker, knit 1 in the front, and you knit 1 in the back. And then you just continue knitting. All right, so that is the knit 1 in the front and back. And this one, to have it look like this, you will want to make sure that you're completing those increases on each side of the stitch marker. Some of the other raglan increase methods I'm going to show you, you can modify them and create a thicker raglan section. But this one, if you want it to look like this, you need to complete the knit 1 in the front and the back on either side of the stitch marker. On the stitch, on either side of the stitch marker. All right, there you go. All right, the next way I'm going to show you how to make a raglan increase is the make one right and the make one left. And that looks like this on a finished sweater. This is my fall bluff sweater, a really popular free pattern of mine, and I've got a full tutorial on that. So feel free to check that out. But this is the make one right and the make one left. And the easiest way to remember is that you're going to be making one right, right slanting to the right of the marker, and making one left, left slanting to the left of the stitch marker. So with this, you're going to knit to one stitch before the stitch marker. And once you get to that stitch, we've got one stitch before the stitch marker, we are going to make one that leans to the right. See how the stitches here kind of lean to the right. So to make one that leans to the right, you insert your needle from the back to the front in between these stitches. You see that there is a bar here. You're going to want to insert your needle from the back to the front. So you've lifted up that bar in between, and you're going to be knitting through that loop that you created by picking up that bar. And now we've created one that leans, we've created a stitch that leans to the right. So then you knit one, you slip that marker, you knit one, and now we're going to make a stitch that leans to the left. And to do that, you insert your needle from the front to the back in between that bar and pick up that loop, and then we're going to be knitting through the back loop. So we twist the stitch the other way. And now you've made a stitch that leans to the left. And then you knit to the next, to one stitch before the next stitch marker, and you do that again. And then again, just like we did with the last one, we will just purl on the wrong side or complete a knit round if you're knitting in the round where you don't have any increases. So with this, typically, again, you increase every other row or every other round. And if you're knitting flat, you'll be purling on the wrong side. If you're knitting in the round, you'll simply just complete a knit round. So I will show you this one more time. A lot of people have a hard time remembering what to do, when to make a make one right versus a make one left. And again, the best way to remember is that you make one leaning to the right when you are to the right of the stitch marker. One thing I also wanted to note here is you can make this wider. If you would like to space out your increases and have a kind of a thicker stockinette looking center, you could either knit to 2 stitches or even 3 stitches before the stitch marker and do your increase there, and do the same thing on the other side. You could knit 2 stitches or 3 stitches after the stitch marker and do the increase there. You could also use 2 stitch markers instead of just 1 to help you remember. But in this case, we're just going to do the raglan increase 1 stitch before the stitch marker. So again, you knit to 1 stitch before. We are going to make one right. And I always remember make one right goes through the back, make one left goes through the front. So make one right goes through the back. So you insert the needle from the back to the front and you knit through the front loop there. Knit 1, slip the marker, knit 1, insert the needle, because we're going to make one left, you insert the needle from the front to the back and you knit through the back loop there to get it twisted. And you're basically just twisting the stitches in mirroring directions. All right, so that is the make one left and the make one right. And it's a great look. You don't really see the increases too much, but there is another way to do raglan increases. The next raglan increase method I'm going to show you is the left lifted increase followed by the right lifted increase. And this creates a nice clean look. It's got this great V in the center. This is one of my favorite ways to increase. I'll show you what it looks like here. This is my hillside V-neck cardigan, and I use this increase method on this cardigan. And I do have a free pattern and full tutorial for you guys on that. All right, so to make this increase, you're going to knit all of the way to the first stitch marker. So knit across. And this one, there's really only one way to do this. You can't space it out differently like you can some of the other raglan increases. You knit all the way to the stitch marker. And with this way of increasing, we do a left lifted increase, an increase that goes to the left, followed immediately by a right lifted increase on the other side of the stitch marker. So we are going to lift the left side of this stitch down here, not this one, but this one. So you pull up this stitch, okay, because you've already worked the stitch, and now you're going to insert your needle and knit through that stitch. So we have just made a left lifted increase. Okay, now you slip the marker. We have not worked this stitch yet, so we only need to insert our needle into this stitch below right here. So you insert your needle down here and you knit through that stitch, and then you work the next stitch. So we just increased 2 stitches immediately on either side of the stitch marker. It's a left lifted increase followed by a right lifted increase. And then you just knit to the next stitch marker and do that same thing. Don't worry, I will show you this again because it can be a little tricky. And then again, we will just purl or do a knit round if you're knitting in the round, purl if you're knitting flat on the wrong side. And I do like this look. It tends to be a little tighter, so I definitely recommend steaming or wet blocking your work. If you use this, it can feel a little tighter. All right, so we're going to knit to the first stitch marker. And we're gonna do a left lifted increase. So I knit all the way to that first stitch marker, a left lifted increase. We've already worked this stitch, so we're not gonna go into this stitch. We're going to go into the stitch below. Okay, so we're gonna lift this stitch and knit into that one, slip the stitch marker. We have not worked this stitch yet, so we just need to go into the stitch directly below, insert your needle there, and knit through that, and then you knit through that next stitch. And that is how you do a left lifted increase followed by a right lifted increase. The last method I wanted to show you, a different way to increase, is the yarn over. And this is another one where you could be a little bit more creative and go thicker or even thinner if you wanted to do it around 1 stitch. Or you could go thicker and do this around a larger number of stitches. So with this one, I am doing the yarn over 1 stitch before the stitch marker and 1 stitch after the stitch marker on the other side. If you wanted to change it and do 2 or 3 stitches, you could move your and use 2 different stitch markers and play with the sizes. But this is just the overall idea. So basically for this one, what I did is knit to 1 stitch before the stitch marker. And this is great for summer pieces or pieces that you want to be a little more open and airy or flowy because it creates this lace look. So basically you knit to 1 stitch before the stitch marker. I'm at 1 stitch before the stitch marker, and you do a simple yarn over, and that is creating a new stitch. Then you knit the stitch before the stitch marker, you slip the stitch marker, you knit the stitch right after the stitch marker, and then you're going to do another yarn over, and then you knit to the end. And you can see, and I'll show you how to work the yarn over stitches, but you just work them as normal stitches. So on the wrong side, if you're coming back, you just treat that yarn over as if it were a regular stitch. I'll show you what it looks like here. And once I get to that yarn over, which is this stitch, you just purl it or knit it as you would a regular stitch, and you don't want it to be twisted. When it's twisted, it will be tighter. So you basically just purl into it or knit into it to create this big kind of hole in your work. All right, and then I'll show you one more time how to work the yarn over. All right, so we're just going to knit to 1 stitch before, and I'll just show you how to knit that stitch that yarn over stitch that we just worked. So we're coming up to it. It's this stitch. You just work this as a normal knit stitch. Okay, so now I'm 1 stitch before the stitch marker. I'm just going to yarn over. And you yarn over from front to the back. You work the next stitch, slip the marker, work the next stitch, yarn over from front to back here, and then you just work that stitch and knit to 1 stitch before the stitch marker and repeat this. All right, so that is what the yarn over increase looks like. And again, you can play with how thick or thin these center stitches are by changing where you place those yarn overs. So there you go. There are the 4 different types of raglan increases. I hope that helps. Please reference the video description where I've linked all of my patterns and tutorials that are raglan sweaters, where you can play around with the different kinds of raglan increases you'd like to make.